He goes right into her and he knocks her backwards. She falls into the bucket. She starts screaming, but no one can hear her. It's so loud. On February 24th, 2019, a woman arrived at a ceramics factory in Hubei province in China. She walked through the front door into the main office where she saw a desk attendant. She informed them she was a quality control inspector and she was there that day to inspect their vehicles. The attendant was accustomed to their company being periodically inspected. She walked past the attendant and out the back door into the very active yard where all day long these huge bulldozers would move around thousands of pounds of sand. And so the inspector walked out that back door and she scanned the yard and she saw there were two bulldozers doing just that, moving all around. And then off to the left side, there was a dump truck that seemed to be stationary. At some point, the inspector needed the dump truck driver to back up a significant distance. And so she, the inspector, backed away from the dump truck until she was in the middle of the yard, standing right in front of this parked bulldozer. And so as she's standing there and she's watching the dump truck back up right in front of her, the bulldozer driver right behind her turns on the machine and immediately lurches forward. And so he goes right into her and he knocks her backwards. She falls into the bucket. She starts screaming, but no one can hear her. It's so loud. And the driver drives the bucket directly into a pile of sand and scoops up thousands of pounds of sand that come down directly on this woman. So now she's completely buried alive and being crushed by all this sand. And then the driver, completely oblivious, lifts the bucket up, turns around and drives across the yard and dumps the sand and the woman into a vibrating sand crusher. Now, the driver of this bulldozer did not see the woman, and she was in his blind spot right in front of the bucket of his bulldozer, and he was not aware there was somebody on foot walking around the yard. When the driver dumps his bucket load into the sand crusher, she immediately jumps into action and begins trying to pull herself up and out of this pile, and at some point she gets most of her upper body out, and she waves and she gets the attention of the driver who's just dumped her into the sand crusher. And the driver, he stops right away. He leaps out and he starts running over to the sand crusher. But as he's running over, this woman who's waving and waving disappears under the sand. When this happens, the driver is frantic and he's screaming for other people in the factory to come over and help. And at some point, the others inside, they realize there's an emergency and they all run over. But when they realize what's happened, that someone has fallen into the sand crusher, they all just stop and stand there because they know there's nothing they can do. That night, something seemed to come over Jamie and she began acting erratic according to her coworkers. So erratic, in fact, that her boss told her she had to go home. And so some of Jamie's coworkers decided they would call one of her friends to come pick her up because they were concerned Jamie could not get home under her own power. When the next day Jamie had still not come home, Jamie's friends and family began calling around and asking if anybody knew where she was, but no one seemed to know. And so the parents filed a missing person report and then began putting up flyers all over Austin. No one came forward with any information about Jamie. A worker found some of Jamie's personal belongings inside of a parking garage about a half-mile away from Jamie's restaurant. This discovery prompted police to pull the surveillance footage not only from the parking garage, but from neighboring businesses. And what they saw on all of this footage was on the night Jamie was supposed to be getting picked up by her friend, she instead shows up on camera trying to get in the side door of a steakhouse located right next to that parking garage. So Jamie tries the side door, it doesn't work, and tries a door on the back of the restaurant, but that also doesn't work. Jamie made her way up to the third floor of this parking garage where she managed to pull off the cover to this huge air duct and then climbed inside. And the inside of this air duct gets to be over 115 degrees Fahrenheit. The security footage only showed Jamie climbing into the duct. They didn't have footage of her leaving the duct. So the police made their way over to Perry's and this parking garage, and they get inside the air duct and they find Jamie. There, she had tried to go down this very steep section of pipe, and after getting to the bottom of it, she could not make the tight turn through the pipe. Her body just could not contort around the turn. But unfortunately, going back up it was impossible. It was too steep, it was too narrow, and there's nothing to grab onto. The section of pipe she got stuck in was located in a building just off of the parking garage that was more or less abandoned, and so no one would have heard her. It's unclear how long Jamie was alive inside of that air duct, but eventually she died of hyperthermia, or overheating. It was determined in her toxicology report that she had in her liver. GPS enthusiast, a guy named Dave Ulmer, who lived in Oregon, decided he wanted to create a sort of GPS treasure hunt. And so this treasure hunt went viral, and lots of people all over the world thought it was a really cool idea, create treasure hunts all over the world. And in one case, geocachers in the Czech Republic had to climb into this strictly off-limits 5-kilometer long underground tunnel where the only two entry points were on the two extreme ends. And to get to the geocache, you had to go to the middle of the tunnel. And of course, periodically, this tunnel completely floods. On June 9th, 2018, 4 geocachers in the Czech Republic decided, you know what, we're gonna go down into that tunnel and we're gonna get that geocache. So they made their way over to the Metalski Brook Tunnel, which was one of the 2 entry points, and they climbed down inside. And so the day these 4 geocachers are going into this tunnel, the weather forecast called for torrential downpours, flash flooding. So these geocachers get down into the tunnel and they start making their way towards the center to collect their prize, when outside it starts pouring rain. It rained so much, so fast, that the lake entrance started dumping tens of thousands of gallons of water in on one side, and then on the other side, where this other entrance was at the bottom of a hill, you had all this water rushing in. So it was like 2 huge waves of water crashing in on them. And in fact, the survivors would say, because they were right towards the middle of the tunnel, they heard what sounded like a car or like a train. It was getting closer and closer and closer. And that's when they realized it was 2 waves of water crashing in on them. In a panic, they turned and started running back towards the entrance they came in on. But as they're running, they're hit with this wave, and 2 of the geocachers got sucked underneath, and the other 2 were pushed up and were basically body surfing their way towards the lake entrance. And so as they're moving forward, the wave from the lake comes in and hits them, and now the water is dangerously close to the ceiling, and the 2 that have been pushed towards the lake entrance, they don't know what's happened to the other 2, but they're just swimming as fast as they can towards the lake entrance. And they swam almost 2 kilometers in this tunnel as the water got higher and higher and higher, and they're barely able to breathe. By the end, they only had about a couple inches of clearance by the time they got to the lake, and they finally pop out and they get in the lake, and then luckily there was someone that saw them and brought their boat over and picked them up. As for their 2 friends, unfortunately, they didn't get out of there in time and they both drowned.